"You should have died over there," my father shouted, his voice slamming into the oak-paneled walls of the Sterling Manor dining hall. "You were supposed to stay in that desert and rot like the rest of your failure of a unit." The room went completely, suffocatingly silent. Over 70 high society guests, federal contractors, and local politicians froze mid-toast, their silver spoons suspended over porcelain soup bowls. I stood beside the high velvet curtains in my dark green Army service uniform, my spine locked at absolute parade rest, my right index finger pressed against the cold brass rim of a worn military wrist compass tucked inside my gloved pocket, a habit born from 7 years as Captain Evelyn Vance, combat intelligence analyst for Army Special Operations Command. In my left coat pocket, my thumb traced the raised serial code Alpha 77, engraved on a heavy titanium security keycard. Beside my father at the elevated head table stood my younger sister, Chloe, wearing a $4,000 satin gown, clinging to the arm of my former fiancé, Julian, who lowered his eyes to the tablecloth the second my gaze swept across him. Suspended behind them hung a massive silk banner that read, "Celebrating Chloe and Julian, new managing directors of Vance Defense Logistics." "Your father, please," I said, keeping my voice dead flat, utilizing the exact unemotional cadence I had mastered while delivering tactical strike assessments in Mosul. I sent an urgent text message at 1900 hours stating that my mom's final medical trust documents required my physical thumbprint tonight to release her estate. "I lied to get you in this room," my father, Arthur Vance, roared into the hall's public address microphone, his knuckles turning chalk white against the lectern as a bitter, triumphant laugh echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "You think Julian brought you home from overseas to marry you? He's been running our defense contracts with Chloe for 2 years. They used your severe combat brain disability pay to finance this entire gala." Julian stepped up to the microphone beside my father, taking a tight, shaky breath as he adjusted his tuxedo lapels, refusing to look directly into my eyes. "It's true, Evelyn," Julian muttered into the speakers, his tone drenched in staged, patronizing pity. "I tried to wait for you, but your trauma and those endless operational headaches made you impossible to live with. Chloe is stable. She belongs in corporate boardrooms. You belong in a long-term care facility." A cold wave of hostile murmurings rippled through the hall. High-profile investors shook their heads in overt disgust, taking small sips of their vintage wine while staring at my stiff uniform. Chloe smirked, leaning her head onto Julian's shoulder, her manicured fingers twirling a diamond pendant that used to belong to our late mother. "She doesn't even hold an active clearance," Arthur screamed, taking a sharp step to the edge of the stage. "Security, throw this unstable trespasser out into the snow before she ruins my daughter's celebration." 2 burly private security guards stepped rapidly from the shadow of the main double doors, their heavy leather boots squeaking against the polished mahogany floor as they closed in on my flanks. But before their fingers could graze the shoulder pads of my uniform jacket, a tall, broad-shouldered man sitting at the head VIP table pushed his chair back with a sharp, heavy scrape and stood up. He was wearing an impeccably tailored Army service uniform, bearing the silver eagles of a colonel on his collar, Colonel Marcus Thorne, Regional Chief of Military Intelligence Inspections. The entire dining hall instantly turned silent. The 2 security officers pulled their hands back as if touching hot iron, staring at the colonel in paralyzed confusion. "Mr. Vance?" Colonel Thorne's voice cut through the room like an artillery round, quiet yet carrying the unquestioned weight of 30 years of high command. "You might want to examine your corporation's federal supply chain authorization before you instruct private guards to touch the military officer who controls the primary cryptographic security keys for every defense depot your trucks enter." Arthur's triumphant sneer shattered into a look of bewildered fury. Julian's hand began to shake uncontrollably on the microphone stand until his fingers went completely pale. "Colonel Thorne?" Arthur stammered into the microphone, his loud voice faltering. I think there has been a profound misunderstanding. This is a private corporate engagement dinner. Evelyn is simply a low-level, medically discharged veteran living off government welfare payments."
Colonel Thorne didn't even glance at Arthur. He turned toward me, clicked his heels together with a resounding snap, and brought his right hand up to his brow in a flawless, rigid military salute. "Captain Vance," Colonel Thorne declared, clear enough for every recording device in the room to capture. "Operation Deep Vault has reached total execution status by the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. The floor is yours, ma'am." My sister Chloe blinked in rapid panic, looking back and forth between the colonel and my motionless silhouette. "What operation? What is he talking about, Julian?" Julian didn't answer. A single bead of freezing sweat rolled down his jawline, dropping onto his crisp silk shirt collar. I took 3 deliberate, steady steps forward, the soles of my dress shoes clicking like pistol shots against the wood flooring. I pulled the heavy titanium security keycard marked Alpha 77 from my pocket and held it high under the direct glare of the chandelier lights. The exact clearance card my late mother, Evelyn Vance, had secretly encoded and buried inside my military deployment kit before I shipped out overseas. 4 years ago, my mother left 52% of Vance Defense Logistics to me in an unbreachable military trust, specifying that my operational service in combat intelligence made me the sole legal steward of the family's defense transport contracts. "Don't listen to her!" Arthur shrieked, rushing down the small wooden steps of the stage. "She is mentally unfit. She suffers from severe blast-induced memory loss. She forged those certificates." I spent 2 years in military neurological rehabilitation recovering from a mortar strike in Kandahar. And during those 2 years, Father, you told me that Nam died of sudden heart failure, that her medical bills had completely wiped out the family estate, and that if I didn't assign my monthly military disability checks to Chloe, our family name would be ruined by public bankruptcy. "It was bankrupt," Arthur yelled, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple as he waved his hands frantically at the audience. "Then why," Colonel Thorne spoke up, opening a heavy blue leather dossier on his table, "does the Department of Veterans Affairs audit confirm that Captain Vance's medical treatments were covered 100% by the federal government, while her personal disability pay was routed into Chloe Vance Global Holding Company in Switzerland to purchase luxury estates in France?" The silence in the grand hall was so thick you could hear the faint hum of the heating vents. Arthur froze mid-stride. His mouth snapped open, but no words came out. "You lied to me for 2 solid years, Father," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly, quiet cadence that held the room spellbound. "You told me Mom was buried in a modest plot across town. You had Julian convince me that my memory was damaged beyond repair, keeping me isolated in a small farmhouse while you, Chloe, and Julian siphoned $900,000 of my combat injury compensation." "Evelyn," Julian stammered, backing away from Chloe on the stage, his hands raised in a desperate pleading gesture. "Evelyn, please, listen to me. It was your father's idea. Arthur told me that if I didn't pretend to be engaged to Chloe, he would strip my name off the logistics patents. He forced me to lie about your memory loss." "You spineless snake!" Chloe screamed, spinning around and slamming her heavy gemstone-ringed hand across Julian's cheek. "You were the one who asked my father for the offshore banking passwords. You wanted the money just as much as we did." "I took it because your father promised me the chief operating position," Julian shouted back, shoving Chloe away as the high society crowd watched the 3 of them tear each other apart like cornered rats. Without breaking eye contact, I stepped over to the master audio-visual console near the edge of the stage. I swiped the titanium keycard marked Alpha 77 through the terminal slot and keyed in my 7-digit security code. The massive silk banner behind the stage automatically unhooked and dropped to the floor with a soft rustle, exposing a massive high-definition LED screen that flickered to life, instead of corporate graphics for Vance Defense Logistics. The screen displayed a live federal forensic audit from the Department of Defense Inspector General, complete with digital bank paths, encrypted emails, and video surveillance timestamps. Source account: Captain E. Vance, Combat Disability, Military Trust. Destination account: Chloe Vance Global Holdings, Switzerland. Total stolen funds: $914,000. Classified freight clearance number Alpha 77, registered exclusively to Captain Evelyn Vance.
You believed Vance Defense Logistics Solutions was being run by Arthur and Julian, I said, addressing the stunned audience of military contractors and city officials. Julian didn't secure the defense transport contracts that saved this company last quarter. I cleared those logistics routes through my active military security clearance while recovering in the hospital wing. Julian stole my digital signature using a forged medical power of attorney my father coerced me into signing while I was under heavy post-surgery sedation. "No! That contract is corporate property," Arthur screamed, his eyes bloodshot with rage as he lunged toward the console. "A military power of attorney executed under medical sedation is a federal felony, Mr. Vance," Colonel Thorne stated with absolute coldness. At that exact second, the grand double doors at the entrance of the dining hall burst open with a loud thud. 8 uniformed federal marshals accompanied by special agents from the Naval Criminal Investigation Service and the Army Criminal Investigation Division marched into the room, their heavy tactical boots striking the mahogany floor in flawless unison. The lead federal agent walked straight up the steps of the stage, coming to a halt between my father, my sister, and my ex-fiancé. "Arthur Vance, Chloe Vance, Julian Mercer," the lead agent announced, his voice reverberating off the high ceilings. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, multi-year military disability theft, defense contract forgery, and conspiracy to commit treasonous clearance manipulation." "Get your hands off me," Arthur shrieked, as 2 federal marshals forced his arms behind his back, the sharp, heavy click-click of steel handcuffs echoing through the silent room. "Do you know who I am? I am Arthur Vance. I supply this entire state's military bases." "Your supply licenses," the agent replied coldly, "were revoked 60 minutes ago following Captain Vance's submission of sworn military affidavits and decrypted forensic drives." Julian didn't utter a single word of protest. He collapsed straight onto his knees on the stage carpet, weeping uncontrollably as steel cuffs locked over his wrists behind his expensive tuxedo jacket. Chloe shrieked and kicked, her $5,000 satin dress tearing along the side seam as she was dragged down the stage steps, her social status completely annihilated in front of every news outlet and business partner in the city. "Evelyn, stop this right now," Arthur sobbed, his face contorted in desperate, ugly panic as he was hauled past me toward the exit. "You are our blood family. You can't let these federal agents drag your own father to prison." I stood straight, my shoulders back, my posture rigid, looking at my father with absolute, unshakable calm. "You told me I should have died overseas, Father," I said softly, my voice carrying into every quiet corner of the hall. "But I survived the war over there so I could bring justice to the war you started over here." As the federal marshals marched my father, sister, and ex-fiancé down the central aisle past a crowd of horrified investors who were already pulling their funding, Colonel Thorne stepped up beside me. He didn't offer empty platitudes or superficial comfort. He simply stood at attention, rendering another crisp, silent salute of profound respect.
Slowly, every defense contractor, military officer, and mayor in the room stood up from their tables, breaking into a roaring, rising, standing ovation that echoed off the high wooden rafters, honoring the true officer who had stood her ground against absolute corruption. I pulled the old brass military wrist compass from my glove pocket, feeling the cold weight of truth in my palm, knowing that 3 years of psychological torment had finally collapsed into the absolute peace of earned justice. You cannot heal toxic family dynamics by sacrificing your truth, your body, or your integrity. For 2 long years, I allowed my family to manipulate my physical trauma and my combat injuries, believing that my quiet endurance was the ultimate proof of my devotion to my mother's memory. I allowed them to attack my mental sanity, strip my self-worth, and siphon my hard-earned military pay because I foolishly believed that keeping quiet was the only way to preserve my family's legacy. But greedy, abusive people do not view your patience as love. They view it as permission to destroy you further. They will use your deepest trauma against you, manipulate your reality, and attempt to publicly erase you, all while playing the victim when their deception is finally laid bare. Real peace does not come from silently enduring abuse to protect people who harm you. Real peace comes from embracing your strength, standing unshakable in the light of truth, and allowing the unyielding law of cause and effect to deliver the consequences they earned. Never burn yourself out to keep toxic people warm.